He is the only rational, smart person I know in Washington, D.C., folks. And then we go to him whenever we need a little guidance here. Nathan, busy times down in D.C. I think your Congress is back at work. I mean, all their various vacations are done here. They got to get some work done here. Talk to us about where we are with some of these aid bills to Ukraine and Israel and some of these other issues that are, I guess, top of mind.
Yeah, so, obviously this week has all been about Ukraine and Israel aid. And what Speaker Mike Johnson is doing is essentially putting 4 bills to the floor on Saturday. They need 72 hours to read the legislation. And this would provide about $95.3 billion in aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Now, in terms of the nuggets, who are the winners of this bill? Well, this is very similar to the Senate passed package. But the Ukraine aid favors RTX and General Dynamics because there's about $25 billion in there to resupply weapons and munitions. When it comes to Israel, it's just there's about $5.2 billion in there for the replenishment of the Israeli-operated missile systems. But the Israeli conflict continues to favor Boeing and Lockheed Martin because they would like to purchase, or Israel has voiced support for purchasing about 50 F-15 fighters. So this is certainly contractor week. Now, where do we think this is going to go? We think that these 4 bills are going to pass on Saturday night. They're going to be packaged together. You mentioned vacations. Well, the Senate's out next week, so they're either going to try and stay and pass this over the weekend, or this may have to wait until late April or early May to finally get to the president's desk. But we're ascertaining a 70% chance that this multi-billion-dollar aid package does go through in the next few weeks.
Why don't we have a vacation schedule? I mean, I am out next week also. Full disclosure. But why don't we have that kind of vacay schedule?
I don't know.
That's just tough stuff. Speaking of Israel, so here are some of the headlines that if you just search under Iran, you're getting here. Iran says Israel threats may spark a shift in nuclear policy. That sounds bad. Saudis and the UAE warn of war dangers as Israel-Iran tensions boil. And foiling Iran's missile attack probably cost more than $1 billion. You put all this together, it says to me there is a real risk of a potential U.S. involvement in some kind of hot war in the Middle East. Is that a fair statement? And is that being talked about?
Well, I think it's always a fair statement. I mean, I think the White House has put out statements to the standpoint is, look, you're not going to see American troops involved in this unless. And you're not going to see American involvement unless. So the question is, does that unless occur? Now, Speaker Mike Johnson, in his statement of why he put this bill forward, is he essentially said, look, if we do not spend this money, the war is going to become hot. It's going to be hot in Israel, and it could be hot in Ukraine for American troops. And the United States would rather, in Speaker Johnson's words, spend this money to send weapons and supplies over to our allies in the regions so that we can ensure that American troops don't get involved. Now, in terms of the Iran-Israeli conflict, it really depends on what happens. Bloomberg News has been reporting that Israel won't respond until after Passover, and that if their response is limited and Iran does not respond, this could end. If the Iranian response to the Israel response, there's a lot of responses, it could blow up in something bigger. But it's certainly, I don't think, in anybody's wish list at this point that this becomes more active than it already is. I think that both the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense is spending a lot of time on the phones right now with our allies in the region to ensure that they try and minimize any conflict going forward.
Nathan, in order to get these bills passed, it seems like Speaker Johnson's going to have to make a deal somehow or get some support from the Democrats. Is that going to cost him his job?
We certainly think that the motion to vacate is going to happen. It's probably going to happen not this week, but then when the House of Representatives returns after this is passed. But Speaker Mike Johnson is going to have to use Democratic supports, A, to get these bills across the line, and B, also to save his job. Now, it's been reports that, potentially as part of the Rules Committee for this vote, that they changed the threshold for a motion to vacate rather than just one individual. Maybe it goes back to the Nancy Pelosi era of having somebody in leadership do it. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But ultimately, Democrats are going to have to get on board with supporting both this package and potentially saving Speaker Mike Johnson's job. And that's just not a good feeling for a GOP House Speaker to have. Mm-hmm. Now, he does have the saving grace that we have an election in 9 months, and nobody wants to go through another election of a House Speaker battle, the one that took 3 weeks before. So I think Speaker Johnson is trying to call their bluff. I think eventually he can call their bluff. But after the election, it really depends on who takes the House and what the thresholds and margins are.
But this is where I feel like the two stories that Paul and I are talking about come together. Like, how do we square voting for the packages when the headlines get scarier and scarier overseas? And in many ways, the one lever the U.S. has is money.
So, in terms of aid, well, think about it this way. There's two ways to think about it. One is the support for our allies in the region, and the second is direct American involvement. Support for our allies in the region really has to come from Congress. I mean, obviously the United States has a lot of power under the presidency to do this, but in terms of actually providing hard, cold cash, that comes from Congress, and it's going to be most likely this $95.3 billion deal. The next one comes in terms of just active U.S. support. And this is where the president can actually direct the powers of the Department of Defense and state and so forth like that. So when it comes to those scarier headlines that you're referring to, President Biden really doesn't need Congress to help him with that. It's really just a political decision at the White House and using the executive branch. So, in terms of the two, if Congress can get their job done and pass this package, then it solely just is up to President Biden to see it through the finish line.
All right, we'll pay attention this weekend. Saturday could have some fireworks here coming out of the halls of Congress. And I know Nathan will be all over it. Nathan Dean, Senior